Hello and welcome to Beyond the Test Strasz Talks. I'm Roy McCorkle, your host, and it's good to be with you for a great new episode. Excited for the conversation today as we're going to be talking about portfolio analysis and really taking a more systemic look at the products that you might have in credentialing as well as related spaces. And we have a fantastic guest to speak to this topic. I'm really pleased to welcome a long-term colleague from the credentialing industry, Tom Warren. Tom is the Director of Account Growth and Success at McKinley Advisors. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rory. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me onto the program.
Of course. No, it's good to have you here. And I think an apt topic, especially because we have so many organizations that over the course of time, at times the portfolio, as it were, becomes a bit unyieldy, or key decisions have to be made for looking at product retirements, revitalization, all those kind of topics. But before we get there, of course, you've had quite a legacy and an arc here in the credentialing space. So what got you here? What led you to working with first, more credentialing focused and now, really more in a broader way with associations?
Sure. Well, for people who don't know, I started my credentialing career back pre-Y2K, if I can go that far back, when I joined what was then Sylvan Prometric, coming out of the operations consulting space. So I think like many of us who end up serving in this community for a long time, the initial path in maybe was a little unexpected because I think it was opportunistic. But I was fortunate, like others, to be in roles and with an organization where I could really go off and experience a lot of different professional growth opportunities, which is what I've had over the past 23 years when I was with Prometric. So I started off in test center operations, did some work in the state licensing space during part of my time. And then the majority of my career there was in account management, supporting relationships with a lot of credentialing organizations, across different industries, financial services, healthcare, education, a whole range of them, which was a great exposure to this community and to the important work that gets done there. At a certain point in time, with the blessing of my spouse, I thought I'd go act like a Gen Zer and just go, okay, I'm going to go work for a couple other things. So for about 3 or 4 years, I was working with a few of our service providers in the technology space, and then decided I wanted to go try something a little different, and was blessed to have the opportunity to join McKinley Advisors. For those who may not know, it's a consulting firm that serves associations and not-for-profits exclusively across a range of strategic areas. So just eclipsed my first anniversary with the firm. It's been great and wonderful, and happy to talk a little bit about some of the conversations that span the credentialing organizations as well as, some of the individual membership organizations, because there is a tie-in for some of this work.
Yep, for sure. Well, and more and more of those traditional associations are joining our credentialing fold as they look to diversify what they're doing in their space. So, well, let's start at the beginning. Always a good place to start. What is a portfolio analysis? When we really use that term, what is that examining? How is that defined? Let's start there before we get into kind of what's involved in the process.
Sure. Well, I think when we see and we work with associations and credentialing programs about looking at their portfolio, it's really across sort of the span of what products or services that the organization is providing to the marketplace. In the context of the credentialing world, it's most likely the examination programs that are being run. There are certain organizations that also provide, other services related to serving their mission with their various organizations. So, it could be more than the entry to practice exams. There might be some professional development opportunities. I think as we've all been in different aspects of the conversation with organizations, it might be things like micro-credentials or other service offerings that are put forward to your stakeholder community that are intended to create value for your community as well as for the organization itself. When you think about the term portfolio analysis, then it really is taking a thoughtful, intentional, programmatic, data-driven review of all of the things that are in your basket today to try to make some important strategic decisions that contribute to the organization's mission and potentially performance down the road.
So, Tom, in some ways, it's not only looking at current set, but also opportunities and potentially gaps to support individuals in their career journeys within the field that's served by the organization. Is that a fair way to also layer it on?
100%. Because I think what we all do as practitioners in different aspects of our lives are to go out and do analysis. And I know a lot of people who are engaged with you, who watch this program, are very much into the research end of the credentialing industry and are familiar with that. And so, in our view, portfolio analysis is an extension of that. And some of the things that you end up determining, are there maybe opportunities for you to go off and add to your basket as part of what the outcome might be?
Oh, fantastic. No, I appreciate that and setting the stage here for what's next. So, if I'm an individual within an organization, how do I know that this is something that I need? What might be that trigger, whether that's a finding, an action, what have you, that really lets me know, hey, this is something that I should take a serious look at?
Yeah, great. We try to think about it in terms of like a structural framework, because certainly there will be things that pop up from time to time where somebody, somehow you get an awareness of an opportunity for this one thing, and you may just want to go off and do that one thing. And while that may be relevant, when we think of doing a structured portfolio analysis approach, the framework we apply is that there are 3 different buckets of consideration to really give some due diligence to. So one might be financial considerations. Your organization may be in a really strong financial position. And, when we talk to some credentialing organizations, especially when I'm in the conversation with maybe the membership organization as well as the credentialing body, what I often hear is people really love our credentialing board because it's stable financial work streams and we have good contribution, which is fantastic. So, if you're in a situation where your organization has healthy reserves, are you just kind of leaving it on the table and not really getting a lot out of it or using it for the right thing? So, a strong financial position could be one financial reason. You might also, though, start to see some concerns on the financial side about your program or your organization being under financial stress. So, if you look out at the world in which your current portfolio is serving, and you say, well, it looks like there are some threats to our revenue streams, whether they've materialized currently or not, then you might want to take a look at that. And some of that might end up coming through your financial document reviews in the conversations you're having with your leadership team about concerns that maybe certain parts of your exam programs or your other service offerings really aren't contributing to what you want them to contribute. So you might want to take a look at that. On the strategic side, I think it's always important to go back and try to take a look at, has your environment changed? Because, a lot of our organizations will go through and do a 3-5 year strategic plan and are using that as guideposts for what they're doing. And we know, especially in the current environment in certain sectors like the healthcare sector, which I know you're very attuned to, and others, things are changing pretty dynamically. So I think you need to take a look at where your organization, what the strategic things that are going on in that area and what your priorities are. And then doing if there are indications that potentially your current portfolio hasn't really changed to meet the changing needs of the marketplace, then you might want to go through and do an assessment of how that's working. And then I think the last bucket would be competitive considerations, Rory. So it's, looking at market disruptors. I kind of hesitated a little bit about whether I would throw in AI into this, because we talk about it every single thing that's in the marketplace now. But one of those disruptors could be the evolution of technological change within the industry, and how is that affecting your portfolio? And then it might also be other entrants into the marketplace. So, you may have only been the only player servicing one component of what your marketplace was, and that's what your portfolio is structured for. Is that really relevant? Are there changes going on that are making a competitive environment more likely or more impactful for you? So I think it's those three buckets, by and large, that would cause somebody to say, I think it's time to take a thoughtful portfolio analysis review.
No, makes complete sense. And actually, I appreciate you mentioning the disruption, because while certainly AI has been one aspect of that, to your point, as more and more organizations have observed the success of a lot of credentialing bodies and membership associations, it has made them more ripe for disruption, and other groups coming in, whether other for-profits or nonprofits. That certainly has been a lesson learned, I know, for a lot of organizations out there who have had to contend with competition that they've never had before. Actually was just talking about this at a recent conference, so your timing is apt. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think you're highlighting the various types of competition are really relevant, right? Because I think oftentimes people who've been around a little bit in the same space may go, well, we can see things happening on the for-profit side, that there's investment being made, there's new entrants coming into the marketplace in a competitive commercial environment in the for-profit area. And I think sometimes there is a lack of awareness of what's going on within the not-for-profit side and the association side, because more and more of the leaders who are looking to do things innovatively in that space and address their own organization's needs may be doing just what your organization may need to do, which is looking out about where's the expansion, what's the next thing that we're going to do that's going to provide our safety, our growth opportunity in the future. And you don't want to get left behind by allowing that blind spot to happen.
No, completely agree there, Tom. I appreciate that. As organizations might go down the road into this process, what are some key things that they should be thinking about? What are some key things that they're going to need to be bringing to the table as they would engage with a group like yours, or even doing it internally, what have you? What are those key considerations? And at the same time, what are some things that a portfolio analysis typically is not?
Sure. I think when in our experience, what we've seen is there's a tendency for people who want to go off and embark on a portfolio review to make an assumption that their organization is ready to do a comprehensive review, that there's an opportunity, we're just going to go do it. And that may be true for some organizations, but we think that the right intentional way to go about doing it is to make sure that before you make the big investment and the culture and the commitment of time and resources to building out or changing your portfolio, that you should do basic readiness checks first as a prudent way of doing that. So when you're thinking about that, part of that dynamic means maybe three different areas. So one would be from a cultural and process perspective, is your organization ready to take this on? And that could be, how's the decision-making done within the organization or in the product part of the organization? What processes are in place to be able to facilitate change if if your organization's ready to do it? And what's the general attitude toward change and evolution and potentially innovation? And I think that's really important when you look at programs that have a long, successful track record of performance, hopefully, and history, and either the product team or the organization at large, may be accustomed to doing things in the future the way they did things in the past. Not as a criticism, it's just a reality, right? There's a little bit of that going on. So, is your organization culturally ready to take on this assessment? The next thing would be, as you're thinking about your strategic approach to the marketplace, do you have clear metrics? Do you have a clear understanding of priorities that the organization's focused on? And do you have a notion, or do you have an awareness that your organization's decisions can be made on purpose-driven, as opposed to tradition-driven? So, your readiness to be able to do that change. And then I think, as has been talked about in a lot of different facets of this as well, what's your data look like? Because you do want this to be a data-driven approach. Now, we would advise that you want to make sure you've got decent financial data, you've got decent operational data, you've got some measure of awareness of engagement data, so whether that's exam volumes or things about your credential holders or the like. But you want to make sure that you've got data that's in a good enough state to be able to execute on this. We would caution, though, to make sure you don't allow yourself to be in a position of analysis paralysis. Like, we don't have perfect data. Well, nobody has perfect data, so that's not necessary. But what you want to make sure is you have sufficient quality data so that you can make sound decisions going forward. There are, one other thing is that there's often a view that undertaking portfolio analysis always means we're going to expand the portfolio. And that might be one of the reasons for undertaking the analysis, but it does not necessarily mean that that's going to be the outcome of the analysis. So what you're hoping to do if you take this on is that you have a relatively unbiased process to help you go through the analytical rigor to say, let's take a look at how things are performing and how things are aligned, and that will drive the outcomes that we see. So, you want to make sure that that's the case. And I think in our view, there could be different ways to take a look at things, but that really is sort of the 2x2 matrix, if we want to distill it down into that, which is, taking a look at how well is your portfolio performing on the strategic mission-driven vertical versus how is it performing financially, operationally as well. And where you end up in those quadrants may help you decide sort of what changes you need to make in the offering. So what could come out of that, and this is something that a lot of organizations don't really contemplate, but I think you referenced it early in the conversation, is what you may find is that some of your products or programs are going to need to be sunset. And I think that that's one of the challenges that a lot of organizations have, is we've had this thing for a long time. It's just going to be there. And it's like, if it doesn't contribute to the mission, and if it's not performing operationally, maybe it's time not to spend resources on it any further, which is tough. It's a hard thing to do.
Absolutely is. And of course, comes with a lot of feelings by different stakeholders on that front. So back to your point about culture, that willingness and boldness for a change is definitely a factor in that picture.
100%. And I think, you and myself, with our many, many years, I guess we can count them in decades, of experience in the industry, know that, when you've been wedded to something for a long time, there is that sense of ownership, that sense of pride, that sort of bias toward things. And I think, the move into a more thoughtful frame of mind with a process that can help people kind of overcome some of that is important. And I would say that from my own perspective as well as anybody else's. I'm not holier than thou. I think I would probably be stuck with the same thing. Like, no, that's been my product for a long time. Of course it's doing great and relevant. And then maybe it isn't. So there's a little bit of that. So I think once you get through some of that, Rory, one of the other considerations or things that we hear as sort of biases or impressions about portfolio analysis is this belief that is really, if the outcome is we need to go do something, or we can go do something, that we're going to do that as an internal effort first, using internal resources only. And sometimes that may be positive, and the intent may be wonderful. Like, we're an organization with a lot of highly skilled people and a lot of great researchers, and we can go off and do this. And so that's what that's what we're going to need to do. And conversely, if that's the perception, that may end up leading people to say, well, I don't have time or resource capacity to do that, so I'm not going to change. I'm just not going to be willing to do that. And, I think part of that thoughtful approach, if you've gone through the early stages of awareness and said, our organization's ready to do an analysis, we understand the marketplace, we've done the research, it looks like there's some opportunities to expand or grow our portfolio, then you get to the question of, well, what's the right mechanism for doing that? It may be that you build it with the internal resources. So especially in the credentialing space with people who have capability for running everything in the whole exam development cycle, maybe that's the right answer for your organization. It might be leveraging your contracted resources and your trusted partners to help you do that. And whether it's your organization or others, there could be support that is provided to bring that capability and capacity to the organization that's ready to move on. But that's not necessarily the only options, right? You could go into a partnership with another organization who's already in the space, who may have complementary products or services that your internal development might end up competing with those other partners in the space, which could affect the financial performance of your portfolio once you develop it or the adoption of it. And it might affect the financial return that you get on that. So if there's already somebody in the marketplace who offers that and you have an opportunity to maybe partner with them, that might be the right answer. And in the most innovative area, it might be one of the things where if there are multiple organizations serving the same constituency with related value propositions, it might be the opportunity to think about a much more concrete strategic alignment with that organization. Think merger and acquisitions. Now, we don't see that as much in the credentialing space as we do in the individual membership organization space, where a number of associations have come up, are serving the same professional communities, maybe have complementary service offerings or products, and come to the realization that maybe we're better together than we are apart. So, I think that helps address that whole question of, well, it's just going to be internal product development, and I don't know if I have the resources to do it.
Well, I love you mentioning both of those last two scenarios, because immediately what comes to mind are the very common, let's say, tension/collaboration that goes on between credentialing body and sister membership association, of course. So looking at that with that wider aperture can certainly not only provide an opportunity to clarify lanes, if you will, but also maybe build up goodwill between organizations. But to your point as well, I mean, no, we haven't seen a lot, but we've seen a lot more in the way of mergers in both credentialing bodies and associations within the last decade than we ever have. So I think that's a really great call out as well, because it does provide some really solid information to take into some of these considerations, in addition to the obvious culture, governance, all of those things that become such hot topics when these things come about.
Well, and I would imagine, my own take would be, I don't think that trajectory is changing. Yeah. I think that, with all of the things that are going on in policy arena, whether it's federal or state or local policy, things that are going on in terms of the continual development of new approaches to whatever the profession is, that there's going to be continuing either need or opportunity for organizations to think about, how am I addressing the market? How am I creating value for my intended audience and stakeholder communities? And am I best situated to do it alone? Or do I go off and, find other capability to augment what I'm doing to create even more value to the marketplace? because, one of the reasons why I think all of us stay in this space so long is we are so motivated by the mission-driven organizations about trying to, serve the greater good. So I think, finding that means of being able to ensure that longevity as an organization over time is really impactful, meaningful, and in some cases necessary.
Couldn't agree more there, Tom.
Yep.
Well, with our last little question here, I guess, if somebody's heard this conversation and said, yes, this is something we need to do, this is something that we've been thinking about, how do you get started? What's a first step?
Well, I would say when you want to go on this journey, first kind of do those couple things that I talked about at the outset, right? So refresh yourself or take a quick look at sort of what the strategic direction, strategic plan is for the organization, to make sure that it still looks like it's relevant, that it's understood by the organization's leadership, and that there's clarity in terms of what the priorities, the stated priorities of the organization are, and then do the quick alignment between what our portfolio looks like today and what those strategic goals are now. If you find a little bit of misalignment there, it may instruct you as to what you need to do, because your organization might need to go do a revamp of its strategic direction, now, especially if you're in like the healthcare space where it's been pretty tumultuous, let's just say for the last couple of years. And so there's a lot going on. So I'd say, first go off and take that. Then I think you really need to do that very realistic sort of self-assessment about your organization's appetite for change and the structures or processes or cultural norms that may need to exist so that you can go do that change. And then, get your data cleaned up and get ready to go for that. I think the other thing you sort of need to think about is, when I go off and do a portfolio analysis, am I ready to do it? When I want to do it, does it make sense for me to take one program first and start off with that? Or is my organization so ready to go on all these different parameters that it makes sense for us to do a holistic, entire comprehensive program review? We've seen instances where people think, I've just got to go change the whole portfolio. And depending upon what your assessment was of those first couple pieces, the right answer might be, well, let's just do this one first and figure this out. And then if we're ready to go and we've sort of developed our capability, then maybe we go do the whole rest of the portfolio. So I would, encourage organizations to think about it potentially incrementally if it makes sense, because not every organization is going to be ready or have the appetite to do comprehensive thing right out of the gate, even though it sounds exciting for people who want to do it. But it could be a little risky if you're not ready on some of those other dimensions. So I think, go do that. And then, certainly our organization has capability to do some of this work. Your organization might as well. Others, can do it. So if you need a trusted partner or a guide to go do that to help you with the process, then, determine whether you need outside help or whether you think you can do it internally.
Well, I really appreciate you mentioning there, again, that emphasis that, yes, it does not have to be everything at all at once, because we all know that many of our, I'd almost hazard to say most of our organizations are often not quite in that position. And even if the organization is, the governance structure may not be, and thus you end up with the same outcome. So really appreciate those various approaches. Tom, thanks so much for joining the podcast. Really appreciate your wisdom and guidance, having spent so much time in this space and seen a number of organizations go through such transformation. Really do appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate being on. It's always great talking with you, Rory. I always learn something, and I think it's just part of the continuing conversation. So happy to contribute, and personally, I get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
Well, thank you. And for our viewers, thank you for your time. We are at the last podcast for our, let's call it 25 to 26 year. We do take off the months of July and August as we work to build up some new content for the fall, as well as enjoy a hopefully well-deserved break. So please do be on the lookout. The next episode should air toward the end of August. So do continue to follow and keep a lookout for that next offering. And I'll also mention if you're an individual that may have some wisdom share of your own, please do feel free to reach out to myself or to the Strasz Assessment Systems account. I'm always interested in new ideas as we continue to work to be a thought leader within the credentialing space. So with that said, thank you once again for your time. Be safe, be well, and enjoy these summer months.